Okay.
All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. For today's show, I am joined by Jason Pickard, financial abundance advisor. I actually wanted to read Jason's mission statement as a way to introduce him because I think it really encapsulates what he's all about. And I deeply resonate with it. I came across it on your Instagram page, actually, Jason. Um, I just wanted to share it with the audience real quick before we begin the conversation. And the mission statement is integrating insights from the titans of Wall Street with wisdom from great masters of the heart to optimize and actualize human potential, wealth, and well-being. And when I read
Woo!
that, that was exactly my reaction.
It's a
Woo!
good one. It's a good one. You know, these
So,
these mission statements are so powerful. They're so powerful.
yeah.
This is such an important part of not only preparing for a business, but for also our life. You know, one of the things that I talk about is that one of the keys to being successful in business, and this is something that I learned when I worked for Paul Tudor Jones, who's considered one of the best investors alive and of all time. He would ask every employee who wanted to come to work at the firm, what is it that makes you good at what you do? And describe it in 1 to 2 sentences at a 5th grade reading level.
Mhm.
The idea was that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Spending the time to redefine and distill down to the essence of what makes you great. What is it about the Fifth Dimension podcast that is different from the other 3 million podcasts that are out there and the 99% of them that don't make it past the 10th episode? Really knowing what kind of guests light you up, who is your audience, what is your message, and putting it down into one sentence. It can take a long time, but when you do that, you can really nail it. And in some of the work that I've done with the Whirling Rainbow Foundation, with a woman named White Eagle Medicine Woman and the Rainbow Fire Mystery School, the Native Americans look at the 5 directions, the north, south, east, west, and the center, each holding an elemental energy of who we are. And we create purpose statements for each of the directions. What's my east? What's my south? What's my work purpose in the west? What's my vision? And what am I here to demonstrate as a spiritual being in the center? And once you get that, and you can put it up on your wall, and it's like, that's your heartbeat. So
Mhm.
it's a super important part for everybody to really dig into why they're doing what they're doing, and why are they here as a human being, and what works for them, what makes them unique and great, and spending a lot of time synthesizing that.
Absolutely. And that so deeply resonates. I love that we just sort of dove right into the deep end here, right off the bat. Um, because I've thought a lot about that I've always resonated with a very simplistic just message of how am I going to express myself? I write a lot of poetry and I find my
Yeah.
poetry to be very uh simplistic in the words. I mean, there's a level of depth that I've reached within the simplicity, but I
Hmm.
think the more that we can come back simply into the presence of the heart, the more that we come back to ourselves, we realize how simple it all is, and we don't need these long-winded,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
over explain and rationalize a lot of it.
One of my favorite quotes about that is one from Mark Twain, who says, "If I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter."
I
You
love that.
know, really getting down to what can be eliminated. What's
Mm,
the essence of this? What am I really all about? What am I really trying to say? And saying it with as few words as possible, and having each word really resonate and be from a purposeful place. That takes time, and that takes dedication. That takes being connected to your values and your heart, and be willing to sit with it and work it and work it and work it till you get it right.
absolutely. Jason, what would you say, and maybe this is a good way to kind of bridge this into your own uh, coming into this space and really embodying these really eternal truths that we're
Yeah.
speaking to. Um, what was the turning point for you in having this be the center for your purpose and for your drive and what it is that you're actually um, the I would say doing, not doing in the sense of we're not defined by occupation and role, but the spaces you're creating, like,
Yeah.
what was the shift to have this heart-centered awareness
Yeah.
and how it differs versus what maybe the path you started upon,
Yeah.
on Wall Street and working
Uh-huh.
in the investment world?
Yeah, so my bio, a little bit of my autobiography here is that I went out of college. I was really classically trained at a good university and very mainstream education, and went into Wall Street. And at a very young age, I was really living my dream from a financial and from a professional perspective. When I was a
Mhm.
child, I'd been exposed to Wall Street, and I always wanted to work for Paul Tudor Jones. And here I am at 25 years old, being an employee of his and on my way to being the youngest partner ever at his firm and sitting next to him on the trading floor. And I had amassed a small fortune already at that age. And I was extremely successful. I was ranked one of the top 30 traders under 30 years old in the world.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I was 330 pounds. I was obese. I was in a mental and physical, emotional and spiritual crisis. I was in a really crappy place. And I thought I was going to die. And I recognized very early on that what I'm looking for was not being fulfilled with my bank account. And then I started on this 2-year exercise journey, and I started working out like crazy. And I took the same kind of mentality of Wall Street, that intensity, and I put it into the gym, and I started just sweating and grinding. I mean,
Mhm.
really, it's like, I don't know. I mean, I'm imagining like Rocky when he went to Russia and he was working in this like a dungeon style gym. And that's really what I was doing for 2 years. I was just grinding it out. Um, Probably not the best approach, about more balanced approach would have been beneficial, but it was kind of what I needed at the time. And I lost 170 pounds through straight exercise and modifying my diet. But when I got down now from 330 to 160, interestingly, I didn't feel that much different.
Mhm.
My body was physically different, but I still had a gaping hole on the inside. It was like, wait a minute, this money didn't fill me up. This physical body didn't fill me up. Well, who the hell am I? What is this thing that wants to feel fulfillment and purpose and love that I'm not getting from my bank account or my body? Because to me, that's all I ever knew.
Mhm.
It was always like, you need to get in shape. You need to get in shape. You need to be fit. And at the same time, it was like, you need to make a lot of money. Well, both of those things actually didn't do it for me. And that started my inner journey in 2009 when I met Paul Check. And through a lot of different experiences with him, I realized that, this whole thing was an inside game. It was an inside
Mhm.
job. And I really had to go from investing to divesting and getting rid of all of the false beliefs and all the ideas and really empty my cup and begin to learn again, interestingly, from somebody who only had a fifth grade education, but was teaching me things that I had never learned on all of my path at that point.
Mhm. Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
that really kicked it off. And just to kind of finish off that thought, I spent 10 years on Wall Street integrating the two of those approaches, bringing in organic food, bringing in my own water, structuring my water at my desk, people thinking I'm crazy, putting in standing desks and meditating and exercising and using the sauna and all this. And in 2019, I just felt like I was being pulled into something new. I wanted to try my hand in another field. So I left the Wall Street world completely. I had identified really primarily as this trader, Wall Street,
Mhm.
sort of quote, air quotes, important person. And I went into the coaching space and really did all these things that were interesting for me, as like a lifestyle now professionally,
Mhm.
coaching and doing getting diplomas in psychology and shamanism and tarot and all sorts of things. And I really was like, I don't want to be that trader guy anymore. I don't like him. He's crazy. He's just, all he cares about is money, and he just works himself to death and all this. And I really shut that down,
Mhm.
only to find that actually any part of ourselves that we shut down begins to work against us. And for me to actually actualize my fullest potential was to bring both sides of myself together, was to be a bridge between the Wall Street and the well-being, or the wealth and the spirituality. And that's essentially what I brought out into the world in my new course. And that's what I offer people now. And so
Mm,
that was a really long journey of how I got here. And, I wish it was quicker and easier, but it's definitely the path of the wounded healer for sure.
absolutely. Well, and it's
Yeah.
interesting because I think I definitely resonate. I'm sure many others do, of almost having those perceived two sides of self, the dual nature of,
Yeah.
where we heavily identify one way and then the pendulum swings and we put the self identification into the other ways of being. But that fulfillment and that harmony comes from recognizing almost the illusion of the fractured self to begin with, and having this harmonious
Yeah.
integrated approach from wholeness, right? And
Yeah.
I can definitely see that's what you're embodying. And
As an elder, you have to recognize that everybody's voice counts, right?
Mm,
Everyone deserves a seat at the table. If you're in an organization, maybe everyone doesn't have the same weight on a decision depending on their role,
yeah,
but you have to listen to everyone's voice, or these little things that are marginalized come and start to work against you and work against the organism. Well, in the same way, there is an inner eldering where we have to elder all the parts of ourself and allow all of our voices, all of our skills and talents and preferences and interests to be heard, and give
mm,
everything inside of us a seat at the table. And so it's
right,
really an outer and an inner diversity and acceptance.
right. And that's like the path of almost radical expression and acceptance for all the parts of ourselves. And I really resonate with a lot of what Paul Chek has talked about, particularly when he's talking about Jungian psychology and really embracing the shadow elements, and that we are going to be driven unconsciously by what it is that we choose to repress. So how do we bring that
Yeah,
shadow to the forefront, at least into the awareness, so we can begin to learn the practices
yeah,
of integration, because it isn't just an overnight uh, flip of the script. I mean, maybe it is in certain circumstances, not to place a limiting belief on that. But to gain that awareness does take time. And I've been on this journey myself for several years, and there's
yeah,
still the blind spots that'll you become aware of, right? And there's still growth and there's still learning. I don't think that hero's path ever truly ends. It sort of just restarts anew, and you begin to uncover different aspects. You have to continually check in with oneself, check in with the heart, and recognize the path that's emerging, right? Because I
yeah.
think that purpose continually changing.
It's certainly a horizon is a good
Mm,
metaphor for it. Every time you
mm.
get closer to it, it moves off into the distance, right? And Jung said, until we meet the unconscious consciously, we'll meet it in the external world, and we'll call it fate.
Yeah.
It'll come up in all the experiences of our life. And what's so interesting about that is that we see these things in our life that we call disturbances, or things that challenge us or that we don't want. But in some way, when we can hold a perspective that there's a part of us literally dreaming that up into our own reality, so that we can face it and grow and become more whole ourselves.
Mm,
When we go to sleep at night, if we have a nightmare, what we would call a nightmare, it's really just a loud message of something that we've been marginalizing or that we don't see. And it's calling us into our wholeness. Well, in the same way, when those things happen in our life, when we're waking, it's just a waking dream. And there's something there to awaken us to our full potential.
mm.
It's all really working for us, even the things that we think are not actually for us in the moment.
Right. Absolutely. And each day I've taken on the idea that each day we are awakening into this dream like world, right? When you come in with a beyond the lens of programming and the programs of your mind and the perception we're used to inhabiting, if we were to go outside and in theory turn off those programs or turn off the brain and experience every moment as new, and just truly embracing the world, it would almost feel overwhelming in a sense, right? Because I think the mind, in a way, safeguards us from some of that overwhelming newness and experience. So it's about finding that continual
Yeah.
awareness to.
You know, sorry.
um, no, yeah, no, continue.
Yeah, it's just so excited, I think. I'm just feeling this intensity inside of me. But,
Yeah.
it was just reminding me of a Jungian quote, which was that the purpose of the church or of a religious establishment is to protect the individual from the direct experience of God.
Mm,
Meaning that, like, that direct experience can be so overwhelming to actually feel that kind of unity consciousness or that direct experience of the divine. For many people, they're not ready for that. And in
yeah.
some ways, these other ways of looking at the world, or let's say the church or something like that, is actually a protection for somebody who's not ready for that level of freedom or direct experience. And I think that that's what you're alluding to about being out in nature, is that some of these things that we do are almost like a defense mechanism from really being immersed in that direct experience, because it could be
Right.
overwhelming if we're not ready for it.
Right. And I feel, when I look at the state of the world or a lot of people's internal dramas or division, I think a lot of the wars in the external world, they're no different than the wars that are in my own heart, right? The internal is
Hmm.
always going to project into the external. So uh, when I look at that and when I acknowledge that, um, I would say the truth of that, there's almost a level of, I want to say, beauty to understand all of this is of our own creation, right? We have this tool of the brain of perception, of really the mind's sensory perception, sight, vision, taste, sensory experience, to go out and live within this dream. And so, that's why when we talk about the mind in particular, I think a lot of times the mind can get a bad rap in spiritual communities or in meditation, where it's like we need to turn off the mind. The mind is working against us. We're our own worst enemy, right? But I think it is all, like you said, it's a way to survive and understand, give a sense of security in a world that is a great mystery, where there isn't going to
Yeah.
be that sense of security. And it's the fight or flight, right? Or the freeze. It is these survival instincts kicking in, but I think everybody still has that intuitive calling for that direct experience and that knowing
Yeah.
of God in its totality. So if one is simply going to take risks, one is simply going to uh, dive into the deep end a little bit, just in any life decision. Uh, I think it stems from that yearning to return to that. And that's sort of what intuition is all about. It's to come back to source, come back to unity consciousness.
Yeah, I love to just say a few things about that. I think for one, everyone, we have to remember that we're all moving at our own pace,
Hmm.
right? Everyone's on their own unique individual journey, and we're really, whether or not we understand it or not, we're infinite players of this game.
Yeah.
And so we have to really respect where everyone's at and realize that it's really not a rush, and that everybody, while they may have different ages and they may even be older than us biologically, they may not be at the same level of psychological or spiritual development, and they may not even be at the same level of soul development in terms of numbers of lives or numbers of experiences they've had in the past. And to speak on the mind, I think that, what's that quote? The mind is a lousy master, but a great servant or a great tool, right? I mean, it's really about how you want to use it, and it can really, if you let it be in charge, you can really be tricked up. But if you start to learn how to work with it and use it as a tool, it's obviously an incredible asset, or we wouldn't be
Mhm.
able to really be talk to each other in this dimension, at least.
Right.
And this whole thing about the outer war and the inner war, you know, Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching says the government reflects the people.
Mhm.
So let's just say we're like a Trump hater or a Biden hater or a Putin hater or anybody, right? We have to realize that on some level, they are reflections of us.
Mhm.
Even this whole COVID experience is somehow a reflection of us. And I'll just walk you through a little understanding of that. Not you, but
Yeah.
the listeners. If we hate Trump, let's say, and I'm not for or against him, I really don't care, but let's just say we hate Trump. We have to ask ourselves, where are we a little bit Trump-like in our life?
Mm,
Where are we maybe, whatever our judgment is, egotistical? Where are we a little bit patriarchal? Where do we not care about others' feelings? Where are we a little bit immature? And on the flip side, we have to ask ourselves, if he really disturbs us, where do we need a little bit more Trump in our life?
mm,
Where do we need to speak our mind without caring about, in a positive way, but where do we need to speak our mind and speak our truth more loudly? If we look at somebody like Putin, who's, colonizing Ukraine,
mm,
where are we colonizing ourselves? Where are we being colonized with social media and data and various things like that? And maybe where in a homeopathic dose do we need to take something that we want in our life? Actually go out and go after our dreams and take them. And if we look at the fact that we're canceling everything, we're canceling viruses without understanding that viruses make up more of our body than cells.
mm,
And where have we canceled our own dreams and our own heart and our own intuitive wisdom? And so everything on the outside is a larger reflection on the inside. We could say we're canceling viruses. Where are we being virus-like,
mm.
right? To
Yeah.
ourselves or to others? And you can take these in various ways, but anytime you idolize somebody or you really get disturbed by somebody, it's a really great opportunity to look at that on both sides of the coin. Where are you like them, and where do you need to be a little bit like them, even if it's in a different manifestation of their essential energy?
Mm, absolutely. And I think the world in the stories we see playing out within society and civilization, they are here to serve us as a cosmic mirror for self-reflection, right? That's what they are giving us the ability to do. So when we look at these figures and particular uh, let's say Bill Gates, right? If you could say all you want about Bill Gates and buying up foreign land and the Great Reset and all these ideas, well, where a practice that I had in the past was I'd pull up a picture of Bill Gates and just look at him and feel love in my heart, despite the fact that Bill Gates is doing all these terrible things, perceived terrible things, um, about with the agriculture and uh, a lot of the political ideologies of Great Reset, all these things that I
Yeah,
am against. It's like this man is a reflection of me. How do I integrate that wisdom? How do
yeah,
I look at him and still smile and share love? Because where the purest forms of darkness is where we can find and integrate the purest of light, right? It's just that idea of where we are afraid to look is what we most need. It's where we most need to go. We need to
yeah.
open that.
The cave we fear. But
Yeah.
it's an interesting paradox because at the same time, I feel like yes, I do that practice for somebody like Bill Gates,
Hmm.
but I also find it important to stand for what I believe in and to stand at the same
Yes.
time for what's pro-life,
Yeah.
right? And so it's this really interesting paradox where we accept the other and we find them inside of ourselves, but we still stand up for what we believe in and what we think is protecting life itself.
Mm,
And so I find that to be an interesting meditation about how to balance those two.
absolutely. And I think that speaks to the concept of love as a whole, because love is not always going to be wishy-washy per se. It is the setting of necessary boundaries. It is standing up for truth. I think truth and love are interchangeable with one another, right? So if we stay seated about truth and we don't speak our voice, uh, we're doing a disservice. We're not acting in love, because what would love do? And this is a question Paul Check asked me
Yeah,
that really stuck with me. What would love do now?
yeah,
When you ask that question, it's going to be different in every scenario. So you have to
Yeah.
continually keep coming back to it.
Yeah.
But it's
I
exactly
think
what
that's
you just spoke to.
yeah, I think that's what we might call tough love.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes I think the world could use a little bit more of tough love.
Yeah, for sure.
That's why I like martial arts in particular, because you go in and you see violence and you're in fighting, but it's in a play form, and it's in a you're sharing
Yeah.
love and community. But you learn about yourself and resilience and toughness, and once you have the willingness to stand up for yourself and to stand strong in who you are, you recognize when others may be acting in inauthenticity or manipulation, deception, and you don't counter it with the same energy they're bringing, but through a strong, resilient, independent sense of self and love.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think
Yeah.
that's the highest value there is.
The ancient understandings of a warrior
Mhm.
are, I think, are interesting to think about, because in our times we could think of a warrior or a martial artist as sort of a machismo type of person, right? But if you go back to ancient India, the creed of the Kshatriya, or the ancient warrior, was to defend first and harm only when necessary.
Mm.
Not harm first and protect second. The whole concept was to defend and protect the innocent, and not to use harm only when necessary. And in fact, one of their greatest tools to do that was by feeding people.
Mm.
They knew that if they could keep people fed, it was the best way to prevent any kind of fighting or war. See what happens if people don't get fed for a couple days, right?
Yeah.
And in the same way, in the Native American tradition, the definition of a warrior that I learned is one who is not at the effect of anyone in any place at any time.
Mm.
Someone who knows who they are and who shows up and is present with that in every moment, and is
Mm.
never being swayed. And that is the warrior. It's not necessarily someone who can just kick someone's ass all the time, where that
Right.
could come in handy, but it's having that as a way of life that makes you, in my eyes, a real warrior.
Right. Absolutely. And I think
And
that's
the real war is ultimately against ignorance, isn't it?
Oh, yes. 100%.
Yeah.
100%. And I think the spreading of truth through love, and if you need to counteract injustice through the I guess defense, and we see uh violence take place, but is it more noble to pick up the sword in a righteous scenario, right? And I think that's an individual. Uh, One has to sit with themselves to recognize what are the battles necessary for me to act in service of love and
Yeah.
truth, and to embody the warrior. Because I think we tend to think of things so black and white and dualistic, and in the sense of there is a clear right and there is a clear wrong. And there's going to be times where that's the case. Um, but in so much of what's going on, particularly with just the complexities of our world today, what is right or wrong is very uh, it's a matter of perspective and interpretation. And I think one simply has to follow their heart, and through following the heart, the quote unquote right will demonstrate itself. We're not going to be able to use rationalization to always determine
Yeah.
right or wrong. And I think that's where oftentimes we get misled, is to thinking we can calculate what the right decision is, when
Yeah.
we need to come back to ourselves and feel and trust in that feeling, even if it goes against all the odds.
Yeah. Well, that word right comes from an ancient Sanskrit word called ritam, Rittam. And the root of ritam is ri, which gives us right. It gives us, it's the root of dri, or dharma, and kri and karma. It also gives us rhythm and creativity. It also gives us arithmetic and various other words. And so, what is right? Well, let me just explain what re means. Re means the laws of nature,
Mm.
which is where we get rituals. And so, when you ask about why we do rituals, it's to get in resonance with the laws of nature and to learn how to act in a way that makes it reciprocal in a give and take in a very positive, sustainable exchange. And so, to me, what is right is what is in accordance with the laws of nature, with what is best for the next 7 generations, with what is reciprocal and sustainable. And to me, that's my sort of litmus test for what is right and what is wrong, is what is in accordance with nature. If nature was looking down and judging this action, is this sustainable for all people, and is this going to make the next generation healthier, or is this going to deplete the soils, for example? That's, to me, right.
Right, absolutely. And with that, it's interesting because I know you've had to do a lot of internal work to come to this understanding of what the laws of nature are, right? And I've had to do that myself. And I think we have a natural understanding as being nature ourselves of what the laws of nature are, right? We have a moral compass, we have this guidance, we have that intuitive wisdom, but it's those programs of mind in the conditioned stories of our culture that have really disconnected a lot of, and you can't ever truly be disconnected in a sense. It's sort of more illusionary. It's really, we've placed these walls of armor over our own heart, I would say, that have lowered our ability to perceive the laws of nature and
Mm-hmm.
really recognize our connection to the whole. um, but what would you say that story we're telling ourselves, the current human story of man's relationship with nature currently is, and how do you rewrite that? Is it possible to rewrite it within the systems of organization that we have in place? Do you feel like I feel like it starts individually, but I guess how that manifests collectively, um, I'm not entirely sure, because I think it requires almost, if you were to put it in tarot perspective, like a tower moment for a lot of people, where the
Yeah.
illusions and what we think we know has to be tossed aside and often come down in a destructive, crumbling heap, like a pile of ashes in certain areas, right? And
Yeah.
then where we rise like the phoenix.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Well, I'll give you sort of a worldview perspective, and then I'll give you something that is more maybe practical
Mhm.
in the moment. I mean, I think one of the largest problems is that we generally believe we only have one lifetime,
Mm.
and we believe that we're only existing in this material world and everything's an object. And so we might as well take everything we can and leave a big mess, because what's the consequence?
Mm.
But if we were really thinking of, hey, maybe we want to have a home to come back to, maybe we really care about the next generation, um, and maybe that we're really on a place of growth and discovery, and this home, this earth is our vehicle and tool to explore who we really are, then we might look at it differently. And so, I think we don't look at not only our own life as from a multiple lifetime perspective, but we have killed the intelligence of nature. We paradoxically, in monotheistic cultures, have killed the divine to worship the divine. I mean, this whole idea of paganism or idols or multiple gods and goddesses back in the day, these cultures never really believed that that was sort of the ultimate intelligence, but they recognize that there is an intelligence in nature. There's an intelligence in water. There's an intelligence in the trees. I mean, we could not survive without these things. There's an intelligence in air. There's an incredible, unthinkable, unimaginable intelligence in the universe. And really kind of getting this understanding that there is purpose and there is meaning and there's intelligence in everything around us really can help put us in right relationship. But on a practical sense, I found that from a business perspective, when I am in relationship with that intelligence, whether or not it's my own intelligence, the intelligence of my body, the intelligence of my dreaming, the intelligence of my heart, or allowing nature to be my guide, I have found that I can be much more successful, even in the material world, because now I'm being informed by not just my left brain, but my right brain. I'm being informed by my dreams, but being informed by the intelligence around me. And I have so much more access to more effortlessly co-collaborate or co-create with this intelligence, and I have access to more parts of myself. So I think it is a philosophical worldview, but in terms of a practical sense, I'm teaching people ways to solve problems by connecting with their own intelligence and the intelligence of nature. And in that, I believe that it's making more of a social impact, but it's also coming from the angle of realizing that this can make your work more effective and more productive, and it can help you tap into your own imagination and creativity and be informed by a larger intelligence that pervades your world that you're just not turned on to yet.
Mm, absolutely. And I love what you're saying, Jason, because I deeply resonate with that because it's interesting. I think a lot of spirituality, in particular, in certain spiritual circles, and this is sort of a generalization, but I've seen um, this point being made many times in different fashions. When you tap into this almost spiritual world, sometimes there's a disregard for the physicality, there's a disregard for the material world. Even
Yes.
if there's a recognition and beauty of Earth, we tend to forget ourselves as an extension of that beauty, right? And so we did what happens, we disregard the physical body, we disregard or write off wealth and abundance, right? And thinking that it's not we're not somehow, like, you can have the idea that we are meant to be abundant, but then in the same sense, hold a self-contradictory belief in that the wealth and abundance is not spiritual, right? So or that it's wrong to
There's a lot of
do
brilliant
that.
points there. Yeah, it's beautiful, beautifully stated. One of the biggest mistakes are these new age, these spiritual movements that say it's all one,
Mm,
it's all none, it's nothing, everything's emptiness, or it's all one. Well, if it's all nothing or if it's all one, how are we having this conversation?
right.
Who's talking? Emptiness? Oneness? Talking to itself? The reality is that you have to be able to hold multiple phase logic. Yes, on some level, we're all made up of emptiness. We're something like 99.9% space.
Mm,
On some level, we are all one. We come from the same spiritual home. We're all in essence the same, but we're also individuals. And that's so important. And in fact, that is the path of really understanding your distinctiveness and your unity at the same time.
mm,
That is the path to fulfillment on all levels:
mm.
physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and wealth. Understanding that there is a unity and there's also distinction.
Right, right. And I've definitely, it's interesting as my own personal journey started when in particular with health and wellness was working out and more physical,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I've never really read, once I really dove deep into spirituality, I never necessarily resonated with the ideas that were not physical. I mean, I think yes, like you're saying, physicality is an illusion to an extent. It is all, you could make the argument, it's all processes of mind, but we're still here. We're still having this conversation, right? And I think a fatal mistake is when you talk about there being nothing and then allowing that to destroy your meaning or your sense of responsibility. Well, if it's all nothing, then does nothing matter? I mean, in a cosmic sense, does it matter? I mean, I guess you could say you could make the argument it'll be all perfect anyways, and it's the universe experiencing itself, and we are all an expression of it. Whatever choice you make, it'll be that, and that's fine. So you could, in theory, feed into the idea that nothing matters, but because nothing matters, that means everything matters, and every choice can be a choice of beauty, and every choice can be a choice to optimize oneself in this experience and find fulfillment through acts of service, through love, through compassion, to
You're
build
totally
something.
right. You're totally right. You know, I really think that you really need to understand paradoxes
Mm,
and polarities
yeah,
and hold multiple points at once, which is challenging for people. But most people are really only dealing with two phase logic. It's either or.
right.
But there's yes and need more information, and then there's yes and need more information or wrong question
Right.
altogether. But in order to negate something, it has to also have existed at some point. To say something's not there, you're proving the point that it at least was there.
Right.
To say that something doesn't exist, because what are you saying doesn't exist? Something that likely would have existed.
Right.
And so, people get so rigid in their belief systems. And honestly, I think that's one of the largest problems we have is we get so wrapped up into only one way of, it really just gets me when I hear somebody say, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. I'm like,
Mm,
for life? What about I'm the best candidate?
mm,
You know what I
right.
mean? I'm for the best candidate in the moment, depending on who it is, what the needs of the worlds are, and so forth. So we get so locked in to only one side of the coin without recognizing that there's no dark without light.
Mm,
There's no night without day. There's no good without evil.
mm,
Evil paradoxically makes the good available and allowable. In fact, some traditions say that the devil is the best defender of God
mm,
because paradoxically, the devil allows the light to exist
right.
as a polarity.
Mm. Yeah. And that's, when we look at things like coming back to Bill Gates and the Great Reset and all of these politically charged ideologies and the destruction of the planet and all of these things that have led to this story that I think it circulates through the unconscious part of many people's psyches that human beings are some sort of cancer or malignant extension of the earth, right? And we are causing all this destruction, right? It's because of that story that we're able to take a step back, observe, see who we are ourselves, and say, does that story feel resonant? Okay, no. So if that's not true, what is true? And then it allows for the opportunity to actually explore a part of who we are that maybe we wouldn't have had the opportunity to explore without that period of darkness, without that story of the false story of our separation and of us being a cancer to the earth. Without that story, we're not going to recognize that we're actually a beautiful co-creative element of the earth itself and that we are defenders of truth, beauty, justice, love, all of these things because that's who we are at our core. So
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful opportunity when with all of the you could perceive as chaos in the external world to step into greater light on an individual level. And when you can do that, that makes all of your interactions from a space of light and love. And you can begin to see how that impacts in your immediate surroundings. And the domino effect of that, it's almost impossible for us to truly rationalize what that means on a collective level. When you impact one person, how many people do they impact? It's impossible to measure and quantify, but there's a knowing that that is how we actually, uh, I would say, harmonize and have this reunion as a collective to recognize who it is that we actually are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in my course, I talk about this as questioning as a meta skill.
Mm,
That when I've studied some of the best people in the world, all of them had this deep desire to ask big questions.
mm,
In fact, if you go back to ancient times, the most revered people were the ones who asked, what is life all about? Who am I? Why am I here? How do I live life well? You know, I sit on the board at the University of Virginia of a department called the Contemplative Sciences Center,
mm,
where we're trying to bring meditation and mindfulness and contemplation into education because it's been divorced. And I was sitting around a board dinner with a lot of very influential people, and we were talking about how do we get this maybe someday to be considered to be something you could minor in at the university.
mm,
And I'm thinking to myself, we can't even get this to be a minor, let alone a major. If we went back 1,000 years ago, or not even so long, people who asked these questions would be honored and thrown rose petals at their feet and offered them meals and massaged their bare feet with like sandalwood paste, right? I mean, these would be the people that we would call priests or Brahmins, like the most enlightened people. And we've come so far away from that. But, you know, in our life, Paul Chek says, any belief system worth living is worth questioning.
mm,
Think about that. If you're going to wake up and take your precious life that could end at any moment and live out today a belief system about what you think is best for you, your family, your tribe, or the world, isn't the least you can do to question it and really ask the question, is this really true? Is this really true for me? Is this really true for others?
mm,
And in the same way, from an investing perspective, when I worked for Paul Tudor Jones on Wall Street, he had this amazing idea that would blow my mind, which is that he would wake up each day and look at his investment portfolio and assume that everything he has on is wrong.
mm,
And it was only when he could prove to himself, without a question of a doubt, that it wasn't wrong, did he consider it right and worth having on the books. Meaning, he would look at such and such an idea that he had on from yesterday and tried it as hard as he could to disprove it. Show like, why is, this is wrong, or this could be wrong, or this could happen, or that could happen, and stress test it and imagine all the different possibilities. And after he questioned all sides of it, every facet of it, if it's still held up, he would say essentially, this is a belief system worth living. This is an investment worth having. This is
mm,
and so forth. And I think that that is one of the most important skills to being a successful business or professional, and at the same time, being a successful human being.
mm. Absolutely. And that just the idea, question everything. And a lot of time I hear that thrown around quite a bit, but how much questioning of ourselves are we doing? And, can we take responsibility for the exact scenarios that we're in? Because it was all a creation of our choices previously, right? Maybe some of those choices were done unconsciously, or we took paths that were not in the highest alignment of our heart, and we followed darkness, temptation, whatever it may be, right? I know we've all made decisions like that. where we come to maybe look back and say, okay, maybe that wasn't the best idea. But you could say even that was still necessary because it brought you the experience and the wisdom that it did, right? I'm
Yeah.
sure if you, being over 300 pounds was a good in the long run. Obviously, it wasn't healthy in the time. Um, and there's certain elements where it's like, wow, I wish I was introduced to this at an earlier time, or I wish I had started with this foundation, because imagine where I'd be X, Y, and Z, right? We can always have those hypothetical dream scenarios. But if we don't go through that suffering and we don't go through the consequences of our choices and then own them radically, there isn't going to be that, um, I would say, ability for us to
Yeah.
take control of our reality in a sense, and not in the sense where we need to control everything, but having the conscious awareness to continually question ourselves and question beliefs, because what works for me today, it might not work for me tomorrow. And that's okay. But I think we struggle so mightily to let go of especially, when something has served us for so long, or so, whether it's a relationship or a spiritual practice that has brought us to where we are. But if that becomes a crutch, we have to have the awareness to let it let it pass and release it. Otherwise,
Yeah.
we're going to grip too tightly and hurt ourselves.
Yeah, one way to think about that is that it takes over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit and over 800,000 pounds of pressure per square inch to make a diamond. It takes intense heat and intense pressure. And along the way, it's a very good chance that we may crack. But if we can get through it, we turn into a diamond, a
Mm,
beautiful, multifaceted, crystal clear, rare gem.
right,
And I
right.
think that's what it is. But on a more practical sense, if I look back at my life, and I'm sure if the listeners look back at their life, and I'm sure if you look back at your life, if you ask yourself, where did I learn more? What made me more of who I am today? Was it my wins or my losses? I think all of us will realize that we learned a lot from our mistakes. Being
Mm,
330 pounds made me into the coach I am today. I never would have gone on this journey if I never had that experience. If you look at, there's a million different ways to look at it, but all of the greatest people in the world have all had to risk failure. Thomas Edison had thousands and thousands of failures before he created the light bulb. You know, um, Paul Tudor Jones would tell me as a trader that a very important stop on the way to becoming a great investor is having a blow up,
mm,
because then you really have a felt sense of what it feels like to lose money, and you know what you'll never do again with your client's capital. And so risking failure and making mistakes, as long as you have the mindset of an infinite player that wants to learn and evolve, that every mistake can evolve into a profitable or a positive experience.
mm.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the idea of the universe working for you, and that in your mistakes, even then, can you recognize you were guided and you were brought into that quote unquote mistake for the reason that it's going to turn into your greatest success, and that it is
Yeah.
going to be the foundation for who you are and what you're meant to become and share with the world. Right. And I think that allows you to really begin to plant the seeds of success, plant seeds of abundance. Right now it's the springtime and it's a new moon, right? So I've been very focused, just so happens that this is what we're in. Um, there's all of these new projects for me. There's all of these new ideas, new relationships, new people, new scenarios, right? And I'm really planting seeds of abundance. And through however the duration of each, I'll water them as needed. And certainly nature will have its elements of chaos, and unexpected storms may come in and this and that, but at the end of the day there will be a harvest, because when you sit and you can recognize beginnings and you can recognize opportunity. I think you just sort of you're generate action guided by faith in the knowing that if you allow the heart to lead, everything else will fall into place, even if it's in a way that's not necessarily what you fully anticipated or expected, right? I think that's the beauty in it,
Yeah.
having a
Yeah.
solid foundation and then allowing there to be the elements of spontaneity that naturally exist, right?
Yeah. Something interesting about that, you mentioned the new moon in the springtime.
Mhm.
On one level, it's really important to find out, let's say, on a daily basis, what times of the day work best for us, right? Are we like a morning person or a nighttime person? What part of the day do I need to do my work or spend time with my family or exercise? And really cultivating periods of isolated chunks of time around those so that we can be as productive as possible in those moments. So we're not doing 10 things at once, and we're not being completely distracted, but we're entering into these like 90-minute to 2-hour chunks of flow states where we're completely immersed in what we're doing, and then we move on to the next activity. But the problem is, or something just to awaken people to, is often we wake up each day and we behave like it's a perpetual new moon
Mm.
or an infinite summer. And we don't recognize that the moons have cycles and the seasons have cycles, and that we're completely in resonance with those energies. And that when we work against the natural cycles of nature, it's like we're swimming upstream versus downstream, or we're rowing instead of sailing. And
Right.
so the idea is that if you could look at the times of the year and even the times of the month within the 28 or so day moon cycle, to match your levels of energy and productivity and what you want to create in the world. Maybe it's like a bigger workout, or maybe it's like a big meeting or speaking at a conference, versus like the opposite of taking a few days off or having a retreat or having more deeper meditations, for example, or just resting, having a little mini winter or a mini full moon. You can actually learn to do more with less effort because you're going with the tides.
Mm.
We know the moon has effect on the tides. Anyone who's ever been to the beach or ever been on a boat knows that the moon affects the tides. There's high and low tides all the time. But we don't realize that we're 99% water by molecular count. And so what are our high and low tides, and how is nature moving us inside of ourselves? And this is a little bit more obvious for a woman with a menstruation cycle that's
Mm.
generally linked to the moon cycle with various levels of energy from ovulation to menstruation. But men, we have cycles as well. And there are plenty of studies out there that show our levels of testosterone, our levels of irritability or aggression, our sleep quality, relationship challenges, and many other factors, including like car crashes and accidents and various other things, are all linked to the cycles of the moon.
Mm.
So this is getting back to that idea of working with nature, because the reality is even if you're not tapped in on a psycho-spiritual level to these things, which I think would be healthy for most people, but even if you're not tapped in, but you understand that there is a way to recognize patterns in nature. When I was a trader, we'd look at to recognize patterns in the charts.
Mhm.
But yogis were basically traders of nature. They were recognizing that, okay, every time the moon's in this position, every time the planets are in this position, people have a propensity to do this. That's what astrology is.
Right.
It's pattern recognition. It's a science. It's not woo-woo. It's a science of paying attention to patterns and how they impact people. This is what biodynamic farming is, and various other things.
Right.
And so when you get connected to these kinds of things, you become more abundant on all level, and you don't have to work so hard because you're going with the tides of things.
Right. Absolutely. And it's interesting because the idea of abundance, so much in just earthly um, dealings in general, right? There's this stereotype in our society that in order to be abundant, you do have to almost over exert yourself. You do have to be in the constant do, go mentality. And I'm somebody myself, I'm very high energy in my day to day. I fill my days. I go and but I do so in a way where it's more of a flow, right? I don't feel overly exhausted, but I listen. It's like, what do I need, and how can I optimize myself, optimize what I'm doing, and that changes day to day. There's certain structures that are in place every day, certainly, and uh, I found systems that work for me. But in the same sense, it's not, even though I've I am high energy and I don't do it in a way that I'm overexerting, right? Or that I'm feeling drained and empty at that place. Because I think that seems to be the struggle a lot of people have. It's that overexerting oneself to the point to where they are drained. And then that
Yeah.
itself is what causes maybe more issues than not going hard enough at all. Right. So it's the opposite side of that pendulum. If you're not working hard at all and you're working hard too much, where is that balance, right? And that
The,
integration.
the reality is, if you really think about it, is that these big eureka, inspiring breakthrough moments don't happen when we're pushing ourselves.
Yeah.
Everyone's had this experience, I'm sure, of working long hours, trying to figure out a problem, only to, on the drive home or on the weekend or on vacation or in the shower, have this moment of clarity. Now,
Mm,
you can't just only have those other moments of in the shower and not do any work, because you actually have to take that information into formation.
yeah.
But by just working on the left brain, you know, no pain, no gain, I'm going to sit at my desk all day, you don't allow for that relaxation, for that moment of inspiration to come in. I mean, the greatest example is Archimedes, second century, I believe, mathematician who was tasked with trying to disprove that a crown made for the king was made of pure gold.
Mm,
The king believed that it wasn't made of gold, and I guess the whoever made the crown was saying it was real. And Archimedes was trying to figure this thing out. He was trying to figure it out. He couldn't figure it out, and he finally said, "Screw it, I give up for the moment, at least." And he draws a bath, and as he's getting into the bathtub, he realizes that the amount of water displaced by his body in the tub was equal to his weight, and that he could use that formula to figure out if the crown was made of gold or not, which he later proved that it was not, which probably
mm.
was not very good for the person who made it. But anyway, the point is that it wasn't from trying to figure it out more. It was in a moment of completely letting go, having done all of the work, and then entering into a bathtub just to completely relax and let go. It's that interplay of working and relaxing.
Mm,
Many businesses know that these days, that they devise games and breaks and move desks around and create, you know, interactive experiences for employees, because they realize that there's only so much that can get done sitting in a cubicle, staring at a screen, doing the same thing for, 8, 12 hours a day. But that you have to mix it up. You have to allow for play. They bring in, ping pong tables and pool tables, and
right.
I don't know, offer like little social hours and things, because that's actually when it's not like the essential piece, but it is a part of the puzzle, is that we have to have this ebb and flow to working and relaxing, working and playing, and that in that interplay, we create something new.
Absolutely. And I think it's helpful for people who might be in the go mentality to structure in the relaxation, right? To schedule it in. If somebody is a rigid scheduler, schedule in a sunset every day, something along those lines, right? Schedule in the time of
100%.
where I'm gonna go and meditate for 20 minutes at 12 o'clock. Great. That's
Yeah.
that's a start. And I think there's a level of I've always been somebody who's I think earlier in my early 20s in particular, super spontaneous, almost to my dismay, to where I didn't have enough rigid structure. And I
Hmm.
would fill my days and I'd work hard, but it wasn't always in the most organized fashion. But
Sure.
now, the pendulum swings the other way, to where I am very much scheduling things out. But I know that, all right, at 8 o'clock every day, not every day, but 8 o'clock most days, after I finish up at martial arts at 7:30, I'm gonna go over to the park down the street and I'm gonna watch a sunset over the Rocky Mountains, right? 'Cause that's and it's a beautiful time to where I can just be present,
Yeah.
relax, unwind, and just allow myself those the quiet moments
Yeah.
of tranquility, right? And
Yeah.
I guess in theory, that's structured in. It's structured relaxation time.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think,
On a practical level, I learned from Paul Chek, we call this sacred time.
mm,
To be honest, I have to remind myself to do this with my wife.
yeah,
Just to say, okay, here's 1 hour a day. I mean, I'm a pretty busy guy. I'm seeing a lot of clients now, doing a lot of podcasts, all sorts of stuff. I have to put on my calendar 1 hour a day to say, this is the time that I'm just going to go do something completely spontaneous with my wife. Make love, go for a walk, talk.
mm,
If we don't structure it in, we'll likely forget to do it. And in the same way, we have to create sacred time for ourselves, time to have fun on a daily basis, time to have fun on a weekly basis, maybe a day off, time to have fun on a monthly or a yearly basis, scheduling in vacations and things like that, and looking at it from all levels. Because if we don't actually make a habit of it, we'll forget to do it.
yeah, yeah. And it
Yeah.
can get lost in the we view our priorities,
Yeah.
right? And it's like that. All right, I need to get this project done. I need to move from this to the next. But it's like, does any of that truly matter if we're not taking that relaxation time
Yeah.
in
And we're not as
value?
effective. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing I just want to add about that is that, you know, we all think we have these, strengths and weaknesses, right?
Mhm.
But what's interesting about it, what I've studied, is that inherent in our strength, our greatest strength, is a weakness. And in our greatest weakness, we have a strength. And actually, to be at our best, we have to incorporate the two. And I'll just give you a quick example. One of my greatest strengths is my discipline around rituals
Mhm.
and getting things done. I could be very scheduled and very disciplined, be a very good student. But I can get so bogged down in rituals that I forget to stop and smell the roses or ask, why am I doing this? Or make time to just relax and hang out.
Mm,
And so I'm at my best when I balance my strength with the inherent weakness. On the flip side, one of my biggest weaknesses, I could say, might be something lingering from when I was overweight, and that I have a sense of self doubt, or I don't truly maybe love myself as much as I could, or
mm,
like totally fully accepting of my body,
mm,
lingering from old habits. But what's the strength in that? Well, that kind of questioning is what makes me great at everything I do, because I'm in some ways I'm questioning myself, and it's not really, it's kind of a weakness. But if there's a strength in being able to look at things and ask big questions and really look at all facets of things, like we talked about earlier.
mm,
So, for all of us, we're actually at our best when we look at our strengths and our weaknesses and we flip over the coin on them and say, what is actually the other side of this? And how do I incorporate both of them into my life and find that balance?
mm. Absolutely. And I've definitely gone through a similar process, to where I think one of my greatest strengths is my spontaneity and openness to the present moment, to where
Hmm.
I'll let it flow. I don't need uh, I mean, structure is nice, don't get me wrong. But I can very much just flow with what life is presenting at me, open my heart to it and see the beauty in it, right?
Mm.
But within that, sometimes you get lost within the spontaneity,
Yep.
and you need to bring yourself back, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, because I have a similar weakness, in the sense where I question myself and there's the self-doubt. But what I've come to realize is that when we're rejecting ourselves, right? Or what we're doing is we're not even, I think fear of rejection is a big thing, whether it's over how people view us or it's in
Hmm.
relationships, it's any of that, right? But when we're really feeding into that fear, we're not even giving people the opportunity to reject us because we're rejecting ourselves, right? So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy to where we feel, yeah, we fear rejection, but we fear rejection because we're constantly rejecting ourselves, right? So what happens if we muster up the courage and the strength to face that fear and to
Yeah.
open ourselves up? Because then that's where the strength emerges, right? It's easy to identify with the weakness and not see the strength until you go straight into it and you say, all right, I'm going to embrace this, I'm going to acknowledge this and do something courageous and see what happens. And that's when the strength itself is discovered. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that, um, especially if somebody is hyper focused on maybe weaknesses or perceived inefficiencies, go into it. Don't run from it. Really own it, embrace it, acknowledge it, and give it some love, because there will be a sense of meaning behind it, where you unlock who you really are.
Yeah, and realizing that even the things that we think we're great at actually hold a polarized side to it as well. So, it's not really looking at it as strengths and weaknesses, but more looking
Mhm.
at like, how do we access all parts of ourselves and find a balance? Which to me, I think this is a good way to bring it back into abundance, is that's what I found abundance really is. When I did a study of abundance, I had to ask myself this question: what is abundance? We think about these words. I have to say, I have to ask myself deeply, what does it mean? What does spirituality mean? What does God mean? What does acceptance mean? What is gratitude? Like, I know what the word means, but what does that feel like? What does that mean to me? What does abundance mean? And when I did a study of it, and I usually go to the etymological dictionary because I learned this from one of my teachers, Jeffrey Armstrong, Kavindra Rishi, a yogic guru of mine. He says that most of the time when we're looking up definitions, like if we look up spirituality in the dictionary, it'll give us a meaning-based definition of how we use it now, a usage-based.
Yeah.
But when you look up spirituality in the etymological dictionary, it gives you the root word of where that came from. And I could go into a whole thing on what spirituality means, but when I studied abundance, abundance came from the word unda, unda, and unda stemmed from the deva, or the personified law of nature, or we can say in our language, it's not really accurate, but the god or the goddess of water.
Mm.
And so abundance is literally unda us. It's in the water in our body. It's the ability to flow with life and be fluid. It's being fluent or having fluency, and that brings affluence. And so the whole idea is not to be happy or to always have the win, but being abundant means that no matter what happens to you in your life, you know who you are, and you don't let it affect your spirit or your mood or your attitude towards life. Despite what happens to you in life, you say yes to life. That is abundance. And that is ultimately the peak of yogic perfection, and that is the peak of Buddhism, that no matter pain or pleasure, they come and go, they feed off each other. Happy comes from the word happenstance, which means to be lucky. It's not sustainable.
Mm.
To have pleasure must mean pain must exist. And the reality of being abundant is that no matter what comes your way, no matter what your life circumstances are, because as we've spoken about, there are many things out of our control. There are things that have happened to us in the past that are having karmic repercussions now. We get caught up in other people's karmic soup. And then there are just things of the world. Like, I mean, we just experienced a 3-year period of things happening to us that are out of our control all the time around us. But no matter what is thrown your way, to stay true to who you are, that is to me the archetype of abundance. And that is what I base my course off, is that as a model for what I personally am striving for, even though I recognize that that is a far horizon to reach because it's quite an evolved state. But that to me is my North Star.
Absolutely, and that deeply, deeply resonates. And I very much am interested in the etymological definitions of words as well. And so to learn that really connected a lot of dots for me. And those words almost felt like uh, almost a meditation in itself. Like I could go and sit with what you just said for a year and pick up something new each day because there's so much to that, so much eternal truth to that. Because I think who we are, the eternal truth of who we are, is ever unfolding. We're never truly all that we are because we're all that is, and all that is has yet to be experienced, right? And
Yeah.
it's a forever flow. And the second we think we have found it is the moment it passes us by because it continues to move, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you're watching sitting on a riverbank, and heard this in a Ram Dass meditation. You're watching the riverbank and a leaf flows on by. Well, you don't just follow the leaf forever. You let the leaf pass on by, and it is there in a temporary moment. And then the next moment, it's gone. It flows in, it flows out, right? And we are the whole picture where we have the things that flow in and then flow out, and that we have to continually allow the ever changing and evolving nature to take its course,
Yeah.
to allow it to flow through us. And that, I think, is the path of self-discovery in a nutshell, and
Yeah.
uncovering who we are and living an abundant life and a fulfilling and meaningful life,
I
embracing
think
who we
it's
are. Yeah.
I think it's I think it's our birthright.
Yeah.
I think it's ubiquitous to all of us. It's available to all of us. It's who we truly are. It's what we've known in antiquity, and it's our birthright is to step into that now or in the future. And it's funny you said that you could spend a year meditating on that because I just spent the last year meditating on that. It took me a year of every day asking this question about what is abundance to make this course and to really to figure out how I can teach this to other people. And along that way, I think what I found was that it is a little bit of a paradox, in that the only constant is change,
Mm.
but which is kind of what you're alluding to, I believe, with the leaf. But at the same time, there is a permanence.
Yeah.
There is this deep knowing that we are eternal, immortal, indivisible beings. And to have one foot in and one foot out, to be in the world but not of the world, so to speak. To recognize everything's changing and things are blowing by like a leaf down the river that's out of our control, slipping through our fingers. But at the same time, there is a permanence. There's always the river,
Mm.
right? And so to me, that's kind of what I've been sitting and playing with myself.
Right. And even if the river were to run dry, there is still the scene itself. And all right, the land the river once flowed. It continues, and it continues
Yeah.
in an unpredictable fashion, which I think we almost need to cease our need to control the idea of thinking thinking of who we are, trying to rationalize and define that too rigidly, and simply surrender to the mystery of it. Because I don't
Yeah.
fully need to know who I am to be myself. I'll discover things, and as new scenarios come into my external world to test or challenge me or to learn lessons, I can note my response and then my awareness, stay present, stay grounded. As long as I continue to do that, I will learn more about myself. And maybe that changes a key element of who I think I am now, or something that is very present, right? Maybe something has to flow out, and that can be a difficult transition. But I think that's the game in itself. It's to recognize what comes and goes, and the permanence and impermanence, and the grand paradox of life, in that
Yeah.
there is no concrete answer, but there is solidity at the same time. There's a sense of um, security we can find simply from being, and that we don't need to seek outside of ourselves that security, that safety, that dependency on a system or a person, or whatever it may be. And we just can come back to our own heart and allow that to be enough, because it
Mm.
always was. Yeah. So, oh, that's some powerful stuff, Jason. I absolutely love your takes on your view on abundance, and how you have I want to I want to say have mastered abundance. I don't know, like self mastery in the sense of optimizing abundance, and the way that you are giving that to people feels like the highest type of service right now, because I think the world appears in a space of, in a lot of ways, a lot of people live from a space of lack
Yeah.
or scarcity, and that's what we've been
Yeah.
conditioned in. It's what we're taught from the earliest of age, to view ourselves as lacking or not enough. So to see how you show up, and to hear what you're providing, uh, it's so powerful, because I think you're giving people the keys to come back home to themselves, which I think is what people are looking for. And
Yeah.
I mean, so I can't thank you
There's,
enough, because it's
thank you.
truly powerful.
That's honestly, it means a lot. I really appreciate it. And it's very humbling for me. I mean, I feel, you know, I honestly, I feel like I had a lot of privileges in my life.
Mhm.
I had a good education. I was able to go onto Wall Street and create this wealth. It was through hard work, but I had a privileged path. I was able to take that money and then explore all the teachers around the world for the last 15 years, studying with the best. And I did work my tail off with them all and integrated it all, but it was still quite a privilege. And because of those privileges, I honestly feel like I have a responsibility. In yoga, they talk about how the way you get a mango, a ripe mango, down from the top of the tree is you have people climb the tree at various lengths and pass it down hand to hand. You don't just drop it down from the top, or the mango would get bruised and you ruin the fruit. And so I consider myself in this long line of great teachers and this lineage, this golden chain of people passing mango down. And I feel it a responsibility to pass down what I've learned, either from others or through my own experiences, down the tree, so that way we may all continue these wisdom traditions and really thrive in the future, for the sake of ourselves and our children and the next 7 generations and beyond.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
when a student becomes the teacher, and you kind of play in both roles simultaneously when you get to a certain point. And I think
Yeah.
having the responsibility for oneself to continually show up, that's how you make an impact for others. I feel a very similar, um, I've walked the path of my life, and I've gotten to the point where I am now. I feel a responsibility to myself to show up each day, because if I don't show up for myself, I don't show up for others, right? And it's the greatest responsibility to simply be oneself, and to share what we know, and to speak truth with love, reverence, honesty, and a sense of commitment to something far greater than the individual self that we are a part of. So,
Yeah.
and I think you're doing that with true reverence, and it's a beautiful thing to witness and be able to share the space, and get to have conversations like these, where I learn, you learn, the audience learns, and we all integrate and sit with it. And from that, that's where the fruits of, we're simply here planting seeds, right? That's what we're doing, in a sense. And what the fruits of abundance that come out of it, I think it's up to each of us to decide that. And
Yeah.
so, and I think there's true beauty in that. So Jason, we're at about an hour and a half. Do you, I guess I'd ask, where would you, well, one, if you have any, final thoughts or ideas that you wanted to summarize or wrap up, but also, where people can come to engage further with your work, especially they're feeling called to after this conversation to explore abundance. I think, you're one of that I've come across one of the most in touch with, especially now learning the root of the word abundance,
Yeah.
being the laws of nature. I can speak to what you're doing and the impact it can have for people. So,
Thank
um,
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
where would you send the listeners and how they can
Yeah.
further engage in this type of exploration for themselves?
Thank you so much. I mean, it's quite easy to connect with me. You can go to my website, jasonpickard.org, which I'm sure Evan will put in the show notes. And when you're
Mhm.
there, you can find out a little bit about my course, The Abundance Archetype. And more importantly, if you feel called to it, you can book a discovery call with me where you can get on with me for free for 30 minutes, um, which is quite time consuming for me. So please do it if you're really interested and you really are ready to make changes in your life. But I'm happy to be there to support you if that is you and you feel called to it. So you can book a free discovery call with me, and I can tell you all about my offerings and my amazing course, The Abundance Archetype, and this incredible community of abundance seekers that I've created, of people that want to create inner and outer wealth. And we're doing it together with mentorship programs and an amazing, incredibly produced course that is offering to this community. And the other way is through Instagram, where you can get me at Jason Pickard Official. And I'm doing my best there to put out as good of content as I can that's inspirational and moving. And I'm getting better each day, and I'm learning how to best reach a wider audience. So, feel free to connect with me on there. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear about your story. I'd love to really participate in your transformation and watch you grow and experience more abundance. So feel free to connect with me through the discovery call or on Instagram.
Mm, beautiful. And I'll put
Yeah.
both of those in the episode show notes. And
Yeah.
you're not hard to reach, very accessible. And Jason, I feel like we'll definitely have to plan for another podcast in the near future, just
I
because
would love it.
there's just so many areas that we could continue to explore. It feels like, if
Yeah.
anything, it's like this was like the grand opening, and like we really hit the major foundation for a lot of these.
We kick the doors open, baby.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, we can keep walking through, and I'm sure we'll find more doors.
Yeah.
Um, so this is a fantastic conversation, and you know,
Thanks,
I,
man.
I, and also I don't think I said this. Thank you to Paul Check for bridging the connection and recommending you for the
Of
show.
course. Yeah. And
Um,
on that, if you do sign up for Discovery Call, let me know that you heard about me from this podcast, Fifth Dimension.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And I highly encourage everybody to you know head on over to your website and book that call and check it out. And because I think abundance, and not even think, I know that the path of abundance, finding it within oneself, is the key to freedom, to
Yeah.
optimization, to love, to just a greater sense of purpose and harmony. So
I'll leave you with this story. There was the story of the great stag deer who would smell this heavenly scent all around him.
mm,
Wherever he went, he smelled this intoxicating, heavenly, beautiful scent, and he could not find where it was. He searched high into the upper mountains. He searched down into the valleys, the lakes, the forests. He could never find this scent. Where was the source of this beautiful scent that followed him everywhere? And at the end of his life, he tumbles down this large hill and pierces his own belly with his horns. And he's lying there taking his last breath, and he smells that the scent was coming from inside of him all along.
mm,
And I think that's something that we can use to remember that let's not wait to our last breath to discover that that heavenly scent is inside of us all along.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's all here now. All the beauty, all the love, all the fulfillment comes from within. And that's a beautiful thing. Well, Jason, thank you so much for coming on
Thank
the
you,
show,
brother.
man. It was so awesome to be able to connect. And yeah, like I said, let's definitely do it again soon, because this was, I hope, the first of many conversations, because
I
there's
would love it.
so much that we can continue to explore. And thank you to all the audience for tuning on in for this conversation. Be sure to check out Jason's website and book that call. And we'll see you all on the next episode. So long.